Good morning, everyone. I want to talk about energetic resonance of emotional energies. And I'm kind of going back to my 101 type spiritual teachings or understandings, because this was what worked for me in the beginning when I was still needing to unplug, needing to discern for myself, what was a healthy choice or what was right for me, what was really resonant with who my authentic self was. So this is going to seem really simple for some people, but it's worth, even if you've already been through this and understood this and grasped this and then moved on, it's one of those things that it's always worth refreshing and looking closer at, because that's kind of part of the problem, is that we think we automatically know and fully understand something, but we just have our kind of shallow or narrow version of what that idea means to us. So I'm going to focus on some of the emotional energies that are easy for a lot of people to understand, just so I can kind of describe what they mean to me, and you can see how that might have some things in common with your perspective, and it might have some things that are different. And that's just one glimpse into how different people are when it comes to their perspective on what they think something like empathy is, or something like the energy of joy. I think if you asked 100 people what they thought of when someone told them to seek joy or follow their joy, I think you're going to get 100 different answers. So let's look at that. Let's look deeper at what these words and energies mean as a practice in getting really familiar with recognizing them, with knowing that not that they exist, but that knowing that these labels for them are kind of tools for recognizing them, so that we can kind of get back in our empowerment to not get wrapped up in them, and also to learn from them. So let me show you my chart that I made. It's a little beat up, it's over a year old, but here's the full chart just to show you how it has kind of two sections, and then in the middle it says choose your vibration. And for me, this was a way to just remind myself that all of these feelings, emotions, sensations, the energies within my thoughts and my head and within my body, they're kind of a choice. They come about without my effort, without me deciding, I want to feel guilty, or I want to feel anger. These things, emotions, just they're reactions, they're responses, and we need to not be wrapped up in them. We need to be using them as a part of how we're sensing our field and how we're relating to it. And what's very empowering about being able to acknowledge what we're going through is that we can see where our perception is not quite accurate. We're able to perceive where trauma, in a lot of cases, for so many people, I'm realizing more and more every day, just how this applies to so many people, not just veterans, not just child abuse victims, but to many, many people. That the trauma can block us from accurately perceiving our environment, and it actually gives us I don't want to say a faulty core, but a kind of it gives us a faulty filter about reality, and our map is built on that trauma. And this is, mainly with the childhood or the earlier occurrences of neglect, abuse, violence, incest, really just any mistreatment, even when it's just a matter of the absence of care and the absence of a primary caregiver being securely attached. that's something that's very under the radar. So a lot of people that have these, quote, good childhoods, they actually do end up with a lot of these trauma responses, and they end up being, if they manifest as a psychopathology like anxiety or depression or suicidality, they end up going to the doctor who doesn't understand the connection between the trauma response and the good childhood, and they start just looking at the symptoms and treating it as a brain chemistry issue, or just looking at the symptoms as the problem itself, and not seeing that the problem that their patients are presenting with is not the real problem. The problem is underneath. The problem is something that is in the core, where it's caused an inversion in some cases, where people can only feel alive or feel good when they're doing something that's very risky or very dangerous, or like painful to themselves, dangerous to themselves, like self-harming, cutting themselves. There's so much going on, but to kind of put it in a nutshell, and not to get too far off track with the trauma, but it does affect so many people that it's really worth mentioning. Well, I went too far off track. What was I saying? Okay, it'll probably come back to me. Sorry. Okay, I'll show you the chart one more time in case you missed it before. Let's see if I can read these out. Joy, serenity, generosity, truth, empathy, hope, faith, peace, kindness, compassion, benevolence, humility, and love. And the ones on the bottom section there: greed, regret, sorrow, anger, envy, guilt, self-pity, inferiority, resentment, false pride, superiority, and ego. So yeah, these things come and go, and trauma can block off the accurate perception, and recognizing where our perceptions are inaccurate and where we are kind of lost in illusion or lost on a false map of reality. Recognizing our feelings and being able to comprehend them is kind of the way out of the trauma response that's been imposed upon the person. Okay, so let's look at some of these, and I'll just give you an example of like choosing a good energy, like out of this top one: kindness, compassion, generosity. I just randomly picked those three, but they all kind of have a lot in common in that they're about giving. They're about expanding and loving and accepting, and generating an energy that is conducive to wholeness and to health and creativity. And when I say creativity, I don't mean like scrapbooking or, being artistic necessarily. I really just mean the opposite of destructive. I mean creative in the best sense, where it is the life force allowed to unfold in organic creations toward wellness and toward balance and toward our origins of who we are as human beings, without so many layers of interference. That energy that we feel when we're being kind to someone, when we are going within ourselves to not be living out our needs or wants or living out our ego, but being kind just because we want someone else to feel good, and we want to share that that wholesome energy of kindness that we feel when we connect with someone at that level, when we're showing compassion, when we're showing patience and acceptance and understanding. And all of these are not to be done, blindly or without awareness. It's all meant to work together. Benevolence, just for me, that means being benevolent, just finding where there is potential to transmute something occurring, just the words coming out of my mouth, finding a way to embody that energy of benevolence where that's my priority, that's what I want to embody, so it's on my mind. It's kind of how I'm, programming my mind to stay on the track toward good energy, because in the absence of commanding that with a little bit of consciousness, it does tend to get pulled into the other denser energies and frequencies and vibrations and lower emotional energies that do drag you down toward a non-creative but a more destructive mode of being. And that's apparent in the degrading options of culture, where it's about toxifying your body or overstimulating your body, abusing your body's processes. It's all a fancy distraction to get us away from facing the unmet fears, from facing the blocks that are likely trauma responses. And again, whether that's overt trauma where it's very apparent that you have suffered an abusive, traumatic situation, as well as the covert where you think you had a good family life, but you think that because that's how the cultural narrative has, that's what they've presented you as, you're born into it, this is normal, and the TV and everything pretty much supports that, and nobody talks about the stuff that's under the rug. Nobody talks about how widespread the epidemic of abuse in the home environment is. Not just in the form of violence, but the widespread incest and the sexual abuse, the emotional abuse, the emotional lack of attunement between the primary caregiver and the child. Concepts like this aren't even on the radar of most people, so they are not using this knowledge as part of like the tenets of parenting. Our tenets of parenting are like, well, does he have a good job, the father? And it's just asking kind of the wrong questions and not looking at what is a parent's highest duty. And it might be the most important role in the world to nurture life, to welcome life into the world, and to introduce it to its place in the world. There's something about that secure attachment the first 2 years of life that shapes the brain, that allows the brain to learn self-regulation, to develop an organized nervous system that doesn't overreact, to have a normal level of stress hormones being produced so that you're not constantly in this hypervigilant mode, fighting off illness, fighting off anxiety. A lot of our major health problems, physical or mental, really can be traced back to these trauma responses and how they block us off physically and energetically, emotionally and mentally. And that is the root of the problem. And this is, it just makes it even more believable that this is the root of the problem, because it's so secret. It's so simple and it's so secret. And when I find those two things coming together, it's usually a big deal. And it's usually one of those things that I get really excited about telling people about. So yes, choosing the vibration, choosing to be aware of the feelings, It's not about going numb to unwanted energy or emotional energy, and it's not about faking the good emotional energy. It's about knowing that that emotional energy is not who you are. It's about having the awareness of what's going on, awareness of yourself, stillness in your mind, and being able to recognize when you're kind of being swept up in an emotion. And then you can recognize, oh, that is envy, or that is resentment. Oh, that's a big one, resentment. Resentment will fuel that toxic inner critic and ruin relationships. But for me, as someone who used to carry a lot of resentment and had to learn how to unpack it, I realized that resentment, of almost all of it, maybe all of it, was a matter of perspective, a matter of feeling helpless and victimized in some way, a matter of not being able to change a situation and thinking that it's someone else's responsibility to change my experience. So the energy of that is something that eats at me. It's something that compels me to think negative thoughts about whoever I'm resenting. It stirs me downward into heavy, dense feelings. And it makes me kind of a breeding ground and a match to similar emotional energies. So if I spend, enough time feeling, resentment and staying in that energy and letting those thoughts just spin around, I'm probably also going to start feeling other things too that are in that lower range, and they're going to feed off each other. That's just the nature of these denser energies. They kind of pull you down and want you to stay down, and so they kind of magnetize to each other, or it's kind of like a virus in some way. And the more joyful, higher, generous, compassion energies, they are kind of the less dense, the more lighter, freer, giving. They're relieved of fear. And let's talk about joy for a minute. The emotional energy of joy, that's something people probably all have their unique take on. And joy, I thought of it like this not too long ago, that it's the absence of control. It's the absence of feeling that you need to be in control. That really is, it's freedom from fear. So joy is not necessarily this all over the place, ecstatic or super stimulating energy, but it is just kind of this awesome peacefulness for me. So when people hear, follow your joy, I think to some people that are a little earlier in the beginning of their awakening, they may associate that with things that are still on the destructive end of things or the indulgent end of things, where they're not acting in awareness. They are following their version of joy, which they're still getting from media or unawakened peers. And so they're then thinking that joy energy is going to the bar or whatever. The true essence of the joy energy is, I guess it's what you tap into when you are at peace, and when you're not just looking for still mind or total stillness, but I don't know, it's what I feel when I authentically connect with people, and when I'm able to see a shift in other people. I feel like we nurture each other when we can just be honest, when we can be open and face our fears and see how easy they are to get out from under. That energizes me, and that makes me feel joy. It makes me feel like I'm out from under my old narrative of fear and the need to be in control. So I love that the truth has ended up being in life that what I used to fear above all was having to wing anything. I used to think that memorizing something and being, very rigid in my knowledge was the key to success, and winging anything was, very scary. And I realized though that, winging it a lot of times is the access to your authenticity. Just speaking in the moment, addressing what is present in the moment, and not thinking, not assuming that anything you've learned before that is necessarily going to apply. So getting out of that rigid, memorized way of looking at things where you try to take the person's experience and put it in your box of understanding. It's hugely liberating to get out of that box, to trust your authentic flow of connection to spirit, and know that just being in the moment is actually the best stuff that could be transmitting from you. Okay, I talked about it. It doesn't mean going numb. It doesn't mean faking it. It's first knowing how we feel and being able to recognize the energy in our body, the energy in our mind, and in our thoughts. Recognize when you're sitting there thinking negatively about something. And don't judge yourself, but look at it and look at, am I kind of just feeding myself this because I'm bored? Did, something that I saw on the computer or TV trigger me to start thinking these thoughts, thinking about old pains and things like that? Or, maybe is it something that keeps coming up and we need to face because it's coming from the core. It's not something that's coming from the outside as a suggestion, but it's something that keeps rising from within, and it's something to look at. It's an unmet fear or a trauma block, or there's no reason to need to label it. It's just that when you recognize your feelings, you can recognize when something is kind of just popping up for no reason, or for a stupid reason, an unnecessary reason, and when something is popping up and it's a little more in need of attention. It's knowing that who we are as spirit is pure balance, and that emotions are not who or what we are. It's seeing how the desirable energies are usually the same as the energies that serve humanity's health and peaceful coexistence. It's seeing how choosing the loving, creative energies heals us as well as the community, and seeing how healed communities can heal the planet. So it's kind of like a one tribe at a time thing. It starts with the self, and it ripples out from you into your community. A lot of people do great things online not in their local community, but just networking online, because you do reach so many people that way, and the ripple effect can be huge. So yeah, that is its own kind of ocean of data and networking connection. So I definitely don't want to diss on using the internet to connect with people, because obviously it's how we're connecting with each other. It's how I have woken up to so many things. But when it comes down to after you have learned some things, awakened, gotten on a different path, that the connections for me that I am led to anyway are more local community, and I don't mean that geographically, I mean like local to me. I mean whatever comes into my environment, whatever comes to me. Things unfold. They don't always make sense, but kind of eventually they almost all do. So it's exciting to not be so afraid of when things might not work out the way that you are somewhat hoping or planning or whatever, because knowing when they don't, I've looked back on so many things and I'm like, thanks for the lookout, universe. I'm so glad that worked out the way it did, even though it didn't make sense at the time. Some things just, I don't know. Seems like they are meant to be, and seems like we do get a little bit of a help out sometimes. So it seems like that more often when we are in a good state. So I want to encourage everybody to go toward that good state authentically, to be aware of your feelings, to call out those thoughts and feelings and energies that don't really need to be in your body, in your mind. They're not serving you. They're not part of your original makeup, and they're not going to help you stay on the path of wellness. We're on the path of wellness so that we can reclaim our sovereignty over our bodies, over our minds, and over our lives. And these are the steps that we take to take back everything, the whole experience. So I'm just doing my part with the things that come into my awareness that have worked for me, that have woken me up, that have put new energy into my body and new eyes into my interface. So thanks for watching, everyone. Good luck out there.